evening. My name is Dr. Lisa Wasatsky. I'm a longtime member of the Englewood Board of Health, and I'm chair of the Englewood Deer Task Force. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to get a sense of where people are from. So if you're from Englewood, can you just raise your hand? Okay, so that seems to be the majority of our audience. Teaneck? Anybody from Tenafly? Leonia? Englewood Cliffs? New Milford? No, and Bergenfield.
We have some from Howard.
We have some from where, Jim?
Howard.
Howard, and I know we have from Mawa also.
And Cresskill.
And Cresskill? Okay, thank you. And I just want to acknowledge from Bergen County, we have Jim Koth here, who's Director of the Parks and Recreation Department of Bergen County. We have Tracy Zor, I saw her walk in. She's a freeholder, Bergen County. And I know we have some council people here too, from Englewood. I saw Michael Cohn is here, and Cheryl Rosenberg, Councilwoman Cheryl Rosenberg. I saw from Teaneck, we have Councilman Jim Dunleavy and Councilman Henry Pruitt. And am I missing anybody? Okay, and I just want to mention from Teaneck, we also have the health officer, Ken Catter, and we also have here Bronco Lulick, who is the health officer at Ridgewood and Palisades Park, and we have the health officer, Jim Fedorko from Englewood. I'm just going to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is going to be Carol Stanko. She's going to speak about white-tailed deer biology, ecology, and management. Carol has been with the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife for over 20 years. She currently serves as Chief of the Bureau of Wildlife Management and was the former white-tailed deer research project leader from 2003 to 2014. When she's done, Cindy Kinzer will be speaking about hunting aspects of suburban deer management. And Cindy Kinzer, has been with the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife for 38 years in the Bureau of Information and Education. She is the editor of the New Jersey Fish and Wildlife Digest and she works with municipalities on suburban deer management issues. The way we're going to do this is they're going to both speak, and when they're done, at the conclusion of the program, there's going to be time for comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and good evening, and thank you so much for coming tonight. So I just want to, before we get started, I have a lot to say. You're going to see a lot of facts tonight, so I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions for both Cindy and I afterwards. But I want to explain a little bit about our role as the Division of Fish and Wildlife. We are not here to tell Englewood or any town what they should do. We are here to give you facts and let you come to your own conclusions. If you choose to take the path of deer management, we are here to assist you and guide you along the way. We don't expect any of you to be experts in deer management any more than you would expect me to run one of your towns. So please get in touch with us after this if you are interested in any of the programs that we offer. So this is for the woman in Cresskill. I was actually in a field office on Monday, and a colleague of mine who used to live in Cresskill overheard me say that I was going to be here tonight, and so she forwarded me these pictures that a friend of hers posted on her Facebook page. This pretty much sums it up for Bergen County these days, I think. But just so Englewood won't feel left out, when I looked on Google Earth, the first picture that I clicked on Google Earth on Englewood, this came up. So a little closer to home for you guys, but yeah, it's just more of the same story. So I'm I lived in Bergen County actually for many years, and I worked down on Grand Avenue in Englewood, so I am familiar with the area. Of course, 30 years ago when I was here, there were fewer people and virtually no deer, and things have changed a lot. So although I know what the ground level view of this town and the surrounding areas are, when I go into a township, I like to look at the aerial views because that kind of gives you a different picture and it helps you understand maybe a little better what's going on. So we're densely populated here, no doubt about that, but when you look at that Google Earth map, you can see how much green there is. So when there's green, there's usually deer when it comes to New Jersey. We also pulled up the Englewood Parks map to see what was going on there, to see how much public land that the city owns, and there's not a lot, as you know. It's a lot of small parks. I think I added up all the parks that were greater than 1 acre in area, and it came out to 67 acres, but probably half of that is ball fields and buildings and parking lots. So not a lot of public land to work with here in Englewood, mostly private properties. And I always start out my presentations with this slide. And that's because I was giving a very similar presentation at a township in Morris County, and I was on a panel of a board of experts. There was a forester there was a plant ecologist, there was a wildlife biologist, me, and a couple of other folks, and we all gave our presentations about deer. And at the end we had Q&A, and this resident of the township got up and she was visibly upset. And she said, I want to know why you have declared a war on deer. And the person who answered it was actually somebody from the audience who happened to be the president of the New Jersey Audubon Society. And he very eloquently said, we have not declared a war on deer, we have declared a war on imbalance. Okay, let that sink in, imbalance. We're not trying to wipe deer out from the landscape. They're beautiful animals, they're part of the ecosystem. We like having them here, maybe just on a farm somewhere far away. We're not trying to get rid of them altogether, not that we could if we wanted to. What we're trying to do is bring nature back into balance a little. Man was the force that unbalanced it, as you know. Before we arrived here and only Native American peoples were here, everything was pretty much in balance, and then we all came en masse and threw it out of balance. So that's all we're trying to do here for various reasons. So how did we get here? In the most densely populated state in the country, how did we wind up with so many deer? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. I'm going to go through all of them pretty quickly. We created deer habitat. See, one of the fallacies is that we moved into their habitat, so where are the poor deer going to go? That is not true. There is a higher number of deer in North America now than ever before in recorded history. Think about that. And that's what I was talking about when I said we created the imbalance. So deer are an edge species. They don't live in deep forests, and when you cut forests to create edge, you create deer habitat. So any properties that abut on the edge of a forest, like campuses, corporate parks, golf courses, schoolyards, you name it, that's deer habitat. And of course, suburbia is great deer habitat. Another reason for us arriving with an overabundance of deer is lack of hunter access. We have one of the most liberal deer hunting seasons in the country. New Jersey is about 80% in private ownership, and those are all small parcels, so we have no idea how much of that land is open to hunting. Most of the public land is open to hunting, and when you go on a wildlife management area, for example, which is properties that my agency manages, the deer densities are much lower, and you see regeneration of plants. So if you look at that map, that encroaching red is us again, and that's development. land cover changed from 1972 through to 2010. This was done by Rutgers University, and they predict we're going to have build out in New Jersey by the middle of this century, which is like 10 minutes from now. So all the land we can preserve is very valuable, and we should take good care of it because you don't make more land. Another reason that we have so many deer in New Jersey, aside from it being a mid-Atlantic state with mild winters, is that they have really good nutrition levels here. They have abundant natural food sources and, of course, a never-ending anthropomorphic source of food in the form of horticulture and agriculture. An adult deer will consume between 2 and 7 pounds of food per day per 100 pounds of body weight. So if you had a 150-pound buck, that's 3 to 10 pounds a day. Think of how many tulips and hostas that is. More disturbingly, think of how many oak seedlings in the woods that is. And this gets me off on one of my favorite tangents about feeding deer. There's a lot of well-meaning people out there who insist on feeding deer, and there's just everything wrong about that. First of all, it increases their reproductive potential. If you took a doe in an upland natural habitat who only relied on natural foods, she's going to breed at the first time at 1.5 years of age, and she'll give birth to 1 fawn. Here in New Jersey, in most of New Jersey, probably everywhere but the exception of the Pinelands, where the habitat is very poor, and they have all these food sources, both natural and man-made, that yearling doe will now have twins instead of a singleton. Fawns will now breed at 6 months of age and give birth to a single fawn. And older age class does have triplets. Not unusual for them to have triplets, so you have an exponential population growth. Another reason why feeding is bad is deer lose their fear of humans. Everybody thinks Bambi is a cute, harmless creature, but they're actually considered a potentially dangerous species in New Jersey. We don't allow people to keep them as pets, even though some people like to treat them as backyard pets, because they can do some serious harm to a person. So I don't know how well you can see that photograph, but in the foreground is a cement lawn statue of a buck. In the background is the dead buck who challenged that cement statue to a duel. Guess who won? And every year or so we hear about people getting attacked by deer, yes, by deer, even does. Last incident on record, at least, was last year in Kingwood. It sent an elderly woman to the hospital. Feeding deer is bad because it enhances the spread of disease and parasites. You get one sick animal on that food pile, and then everybody is going to get sick. And you also attract rabies vector species like raccoons and skunks. It just creates an untenable situation. You are a bad neighbor if you're feeding deer, because when they're done with your small food pile, they're going to go into your neighbor's yard and eat everything they have there, or if you're adjacent to a natural area, it will devastate that natural area. So, bad neighbor. Feeding can also change behavioral patterns. A deer might cross a road that it never would have crossed before in an effort to get to your food, and might increase deer vehicle collisions. Most importantly, they don't need our help. And this is so funny because every winter, like when, on the occasion when we do have a bad stretch of winter here in New Jersey, I get phone calls from reporters asking me, what about the poor deer? How are they surviving? Which always makes me chuckle because they evolved for millennia without us, right? Feeding them and certainly knitting sweaters for them. They adapt in many ways, physically, behaviorally, and metabolically. So they shed their reddish summer coats and get that gray-brown winter coat, which is comprised of hollow insulated hairs. They lay on fat around their internal organs for a food source and subcutaneously for insulation. And when the weather's bad, they'll bed down in a sheltered area so they're not utilizing that food source unnecessarily, that fat layer. And you can actually kill deer by feeding them the wrong food at the wrong time of the year. Deer, like us, like many other creatures, have gut microflora that helps them digest plant matter. So if you feed them a high carbohydrate deer in the middle meal in the middle of winter, you can actually kill them. They get something called lactic acidosis. Okay, back to how we got here. Thank you for humoring me on my little side journey there. We also eliminated top predators. We did have mountain lions and wolves here in New Jersey at one time, but like in all the original 13 colonies, people learned pretty quickly that these are animals that they don't want to cohabitate with for obvious reasons. So they've been gone for, extirpated in New Jersey for centuries. Other contributing factors to deer overabundance are ordinances banning discharge of weapons, whether they be firearms or firearms and bows, and of course large properties that serve as deer refugia. And these are properties that meet all the deer needs for survival, but no hunting occurs on those properties. So deer can breed unfettered there and spread out into the surrounding areas. So this is where we are as a state as a whole. The blue line is the population estimate, the pink line is the harvest. So this year's population estimate is a little over 146,000. Now there's a caveat to that. We use a formula to derive this population estimate, and that formula has to extrapolate off of a sample. The sample that we use is the hunter harvest. So obviously there are many places in New Jersey where hunting does not occur, like Englewood, like most of Bergen County. And so those deer are unaccounted for. So this is an estimate of the huntable portion of the herd only. Harvest last year was 48,500. So every year we get an estimate on deer vehicle collisions for the entire state from the State Farm Insurance Company. They do a nationwide and send out an estimate to each and every state. They extrapolate off of collision and comprehensive coverage claims. So our last, I think I need to put my glasses on, sorry. A little over, almost 27,000 was the last estimate we had in 2017. But since not everybody has that coverage and not everybody reports an accident, I would feel comfortable betting that it's probably double that. And we're probably taking out as many or more deer with vehicles as we are with guns and bows during the hunting season. So deer are considered a keystone herbivore because they have the potential through overbrowsing to affect the environment to such a great extent that it changes the composition and the structure of a forest. These may look normal to you, especially if you've lived in New Jersey your whole life, because our forests are not the healthiest places, but these are all examples of terrible things. You should not be able to see through the trees for 100 yards. A forest should not look like a park. There should be a thick understory, a middle story, and a canopy. So, as I said, deer are part of the food web, and as such, when they overbrowse, they affect every other living animal in that food web, from invertebrates, insects, right on up. These are examples of healthy forests in New Jersey. That one on the right is actually a forest on our wildlife management area that we did a cut on, and that's the regrowth. And that's how lush and dense the forest should be. You rarely see that in New Jersey. This is from probably 4 years ago, which was the last time I was in Englewood. I addressed the council at that time because Flat Rock Brook was looking to institute a deer hunt on their property. They didn't get it, and since then they've fenced that property. And I'm not, against my advice, But I don't blame them because they were left with an alternative. Their mission is to conserve that property for future generations. And what they had here was the beginning of a desert, because once those mature trees died, there was nothing coming up behind them. In 100 years, that would have been a barren lot. So what are some of the options? Well, you could do nothing. And if that was acceptable, I probably wouldn't be here this evening having this conversation with you. You could use repellents. There are different kinds of repellents. They're chemical-based, and those are either smell or taste-based. They need to be applied to vegetation. Some of them need to be applied after every rain. They do wear off over time, and if a deer is hungry enough, he will eat that plant anyway. There are noise-based repellents as well. Propane cannons and shell crackers that you put in a shotgun and shoot off like a bullet. Probably not a good idea around here, unless the local PD wants to get inundated with phone calls. That's mostly for agricultural applications. Then you have habitat management. Habitat management is as simple as a fence to, I don't know if any of you recognize that overpass that's on Route 78 by Watchung Reservation. There's 3 of them, I think, there. Your tax dollars at work. So nobody wants to erect a fortress around their house. A lot of townships have ordinances about the height of fences anyway. And a deer can jump 6 feet from a standing still position. So you would need a fence about 8 feet high, and nobody wants to live that way. And mostly, these are not solutions to the overall problem. They may help the individual who employs them, but they still leave as many deer on the ground, so you're not solving the problem. Then there are reflectors. You don't see them too much in suburban areas like Bergen County. That picture on the left shows them. It's basically a metal pole with 2 reflectors at right angles. And the theory is that oncoming traffic, the headlights will hit the one reflector, bounce off to the other reflector, and divert the light onto the side of the road where the deer is standing, and it'll be deer in the headlights. So these are expensive. Every time you mow or plow, you throw off the alignment of these things, so they have to be readjusted several times a year. But more importantly, what happens during the day when people aren't using headlights? And I'm always amused that they use red reflectors because deer see in the blue spectrum mostly, which is why hunters wear hunter orange when they go into the woods, because that just blends into them. And then there are deer whistles that you put under the hood of your vehicle. I remember being at a conference several years ago. One of the universities did a study on the efficacy of those deer whistles, and they found that some frequencies actually attracted deer. But my thing with the whistles is, if the sound of an 18-wheeler bearing down on you doesn't scare you off the road, why should a whistle? And then there are beware of deer signs, but we all know humans are the hardest species to train, so they don't work too well either. So some other options, getting into the lethal side of things now. There is a program called the Community-Based Deer Management Program in New Jersey. It's been here since 1995, because as early as that, we recognized that being the most densely populated state in the country, sport hunting might not be practical for every situation. So we came up with ways that people could employ other methodologies of dealing with their deer overabundances. So one of them is contraception / sterilization, kind of same thing. Right? There is one chemical that is legal for use, licensed by the FDA. New Jersey is one of 2 states in the country, at least they were initially, I don't know if anyone else has joined the bandwagon, that license it for state in New Jersey for use here. The reason we did it was for use in captive situations, and it's because of this. We have been doing or enabling, working with researchers on deer contraception for decades, since I was a Rutgers student, and that's quite a while. So, in studies in New Jersey, we learned that Gonacon only has a 70% efficacy rate in adult does, which means that 30% of those does are still going to breed and have babies, and its label use prohibits it from being used in fawns and in areas that have problematic deer densities where the nutrition levels are high, as I stated. Upwards of 40 to 50% of fawns might be breeding, excuse me. So I did a little fictitious town. I made up deer numbers and I ran them off with reproductive rates from real life. And if you, by some miracle, vaccinated every single doe in the township, which is impossible, you would still have a 29% population increase. And this is after spending about $800 a head. So, and it's something that you would have to do every year, right? Because you're bringing new females into the population because you have that population increase, and you're also having immigration probably from the surrounding areas. So, then let's talk about sterilization. There was a great study up in Cornell in New York State, and if there was ever a perfect place to house this study, Cornell is it, right? They have their own veterinary college right there. They have their own police force right there. They are pretty much their own little town, so they can control everything way more than a regular neighborhood or township might be able to. So they did this study whereby they gave does tubal ligations. So the cost was 800 to 1,000 deer to start out, but then the law of diminishing returns kicks in, so those last handful of female deer, because of the extra time spent, cost $3,500 a head. I believe they were also either vasectomizing bucks or killing bucks, I forget which one. But because they chose tubal ligations, the does continued to cycle and come into heat. So they were attracting bucks from the whole outside of the campus. So much so that they wound up with more deer than they started out with, even though they had no fawns born, because they attracted so many males in. So Dr. Paul Curtis, who was the head researcher on this, gave me these two great quotes. Communities should avoid non-lethal methods as they show little promise in areas where deer can move freely about on the landscape. And fertility control means managing deer with cars. So, any kind of sterilization, once we get it right, if we ever get it right, come up with the perfect delivery method, because you have to hand inject. That's why it's so expensive. The drug itself is, 20 bucks maybe. It's the man hours that go into this. So you have to catch every single female deer. In the case of Gonacon, for example. You have to hand inject, because that's the label directions. So you have to hand inject. You have to give her an ear tag so you know who got their shot and who didn't. And also, if it's during the hunting season or there's any possibility of this animal being consumed, you have to put a do not consume tag on her as well. And you can increase the efficacy rate in Gonacon, but you have to do a booster the next year. So that means you have to catch everybody all over again. If you could send out a postcard and say, okay girls, time to come back for your annual, it would be much easier, but it doesn't work that way. So incredible amount of labor goes into this kind of thing, and that's what makes it expensive, not the drugs or, the procedures themselves. And because I know that you've all heard about or read things about Saddle River this year and last year, I thought I'd go into that as well. So we got our first application for surgical sterilization in New Jersey from the borough of Saddle River. And they were proposing to overectomize does, which means partial hysterectomy, right? Removing the ovaries. Major surgery, not something like a tubal ligation or a, yeah. So we're talking about major surgery. So we got the application, we reviewed it, we had independent sources review it, and we came to the conclusion that it was an experiment and not deer management. So we judge things based on the odds of success. So when I was doing my research on the overectomies, I found that there was a paper out there that said that does who don't have fawns or who are not pregnant have a 52% larger home area, home range. So a home range is that area in which an animal has all its biological needs met. Food, water, shelter, birthing spots, wintering spots, everything is there. So in Deer, New Jersey, that's about 1 square mile. So this paper found that no babies have a larger home range because they've got nothing else to do. I guess they're wandering around, but the paper also said that they had a much higher mortality rate due to deer vehicle collisions. So Saddle River is adjacent to Route 17, very busy highway. So that was another concern of ours, that we would be causing more deer vehicle collisions in Saddle River. And of course, there's other quotes from other researchers. Further research is required to address whether the application of fertility control can mitigate human-wildlife conflicts. Because like I said, you need to, if we do perfect it, you need to first lower the level of deer on the ground and then keep it there with fertility control. Because if you just use fertility control, you are waiting for animals to either die of old age or get hit by cars. Another quote, in an open population, sterilization alone will not be effective at controlling deer overabundance, especially if immigration increases as population size decreases. While stakeholders may be averse to hunting, consistent lethal control, either alone or in combination with fertility control, may be the only way to sustainably reduce local deer herds. So, because it was labeled an experiment and not deer management, and there are so many questions biologically about the effects of what you do to a population and individual animals in general that have yet to be answered, the proposal was rejected due to low probability of success. It would not have given the residents of Saddle River the relief that they were seeking. So, moving on to other options that you could do at one time. Some of them you still can do. Trap and transfer is exactly what it sounds like. You trap animals and you move them someplace else. Also called taking your problem and putting it in somebody else's backyard. So, really no place in New Jersey to move your deer. Nobody wants them. Some hunters might like them in their backyard, but they're going to escape and get into yours. And you can't move them out of state because there's a ban on the importation of any members of the cervid family due to a disease called chronic wasting disease, or CWD. It's the mad cow disease of the deer family. It's the same transmissible spongiform encephalopathy that is mad cow. So no state wants to take that risk by having deer imported into it. So we don't do trap and transfer anymore since, about the year 2000 probably. Trap and euthanize is something that has been used in areas like Princeton. Princeton Township was one of our first communities to take advantage of the community-based deer management program, and they did a lot of research there on immunocontraceptive, and they did trap and euthanize. And what that is you set out a drop net in areas where the discharge of firearms is not desirable. So this was pretty, and I went with the doctor who was doing it at the time, Dr. Dina Cola, and literally I was sitting in somebody's basement, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looking at their sliders, waiting for the deer to come into a drop net in the backyard. And what's used to euthanize them rather than a firearm is something called a captive bolt gun. And it's used in the cattle industry to kill steers for meat. And it releases a projectile, but it doesn't leave the gun. So it's a rod that is put into the animal's brain. It dies instantaneously. And then, of course, there is culling, using culling agents. There are companies who just do this, or sport hunting. So those are some of the lethal options. So the main thing to remember is that deer population control is an annual management activity, like mowing the lawns and plowing the snow in your township. It's not a one and done deal. Deer continue to reproduce. Deer continue to move in from surrounding areas if those areas are not doing their own management. So you can, if you do deer management, you can mandate that the meat is donated to a soup kitchen, which is a great win-win. We have a nonprofit called Hunters Helping the Hungry here in New Jersey, whereby hunters donate the whole carcass to special game butchers, and they give that meat to soup kitchens. And protein meals are always in short supply in these situations, so they are happy to get some venison. So what can Englewood residents do? Well, obviously don't feed the deer. You know, taking away that food is not going to solve your problems, but it will help some. You might consider a city ordinance banning the feeding of deer. Princeton has one that's been challenged in court and upheld, so if any township is interested in that, I can give you that language. And the good thing about that language is it still allows for the feeding of birds, which is something that a lot of residents enjoy doing. So it can be done without feeding deer. Another thing Bergen County residents can do in general is to encourage public land to be open to deer hunting. Bergen County Parks has nearly 9,000 acres. Palisades Interstate Park has 2,500 acres. Not many Bergen County parks adjacent to Englewood, really, but the Interstate Park is less than a mile away. So, and in fact, you know, when I first started on the deer project, didn't hear anything, no complaints out of Bergen County initially, but as they started coming in, they were all off the East Hill. So, I want to debunk a few myths that you may hear in the future, and that my agency is keeping the deer population artificially high for its own purposes. And this always makes me giggle because I envision, you know, myself dressed as a mad scientist deep in a sub-basement in Trenton with this machine with a knob on it that controls the deer population for our benefit. If we were doing that, we wouldn't have the most liberal hunting regulations in the country. I answer to every citizen of the state, not just hunters. I don't work for them. I work for you and everyone else. So if there's problems with deer, I want to help you solve that as in any way that we can. Another myth, reproduction goes up in response to hunting. That's a big one that gets thrown out there a lot. Not true in New Jersey. This is only true if the deer population has reached carrying capacity. And carrying capacity is the level of a population of any animal that the natural habitat can support in good health. So if you have a lot of deer on poor habitat and they start starving to death and you kill some of them, yes, they might have an increase in reproductive rates because now their nutrition levels have gone up. In fact, we were on Doris Duke Farms. We did a big program with them. God, it's got to be like 10, 12 years ago now. they had a fenced inner campus on their like 3-mile piece of property in Somerset. And that was 1 square mile. And the deer in there were so malnourished. 1.5 bucks had antlers like this. They were skinny, they were stunted, they were small. In a situation like that, yeah, if we killed some deer and the habitat started to grow back, yes, you would get an increase in reproduction then. But in most of New Jersey, in Bergen County, where food is plentiful, they are already maxed out, which is what our problem is to begin with. So the reproduction will not go up if you start hunting here. We took over the deer habitat. I covered that earlier on. No, not true. Deer are peaceful creatures who don't hurt anything. I don't know if we're connected to the internet. And that's a no. But that was a link to a video that was actually a little disturbing as an animal lover. It was a doe with a pretty new fawn, small fawn, in suburbia, who came upon a dog that was down the block, and she kicked it quite violently, and you hear her, the dog's human, screaming in the background. So deer do protect themselves. They can be harmful at times. And another myth is that deer vehicle collisions increase in the fall because of hunting. That is not true. They increase in the fall because that's when the mating season is, and sanity goes out the window, and bucks are chasing does. If that was the case, we would have sustained deer vehicle collisions through to February when we stop hunting, and that's not true. You just see it during the mating season. So a little bit about, very briefly, about our history of deer management. Does anybody want to guess what year we started managing deer in New Jersey? Anybody? No? It may be earlier than you think. 1771 was the first time laws regarding the harvest of deer were on the books in New Jersey, and that's because we got here, we came, we conquered. We killed most of the deer. They were almost extirpated because of market hunting and because the colonists needed to survive, right? Deer provided food and clothing, so we killed a lot of deer initially. So much so that in the early 1900s, very early 1900s, and even later on, after the deer season remained reopened, if you saw a deer in New Jersey, it made the newspaper. It was such a rare occurrence. If those people were alive today, they would say, what the heck happened? So, deer are one of our success stories. You know, if we had that crystal ball back in 1911 when we restocked deer and we knew New Jersey was going to be the most densely populated state in the country, maybe things would have been done differently, but we didn't. So they only reached carrying capacity throughout the state in the late 1950s, as recent as that. So from 1900 to about 1970s, we used biological carrying capacity to manage deer, and I explained that before. That's how many healthy animals the habitat can support. But after our population grew and the deer population grew, we realized that we could no longer do that, because we can grow deer until the cows come home in New Jersey, but that's going to make the residents of the state a little unhappy. So now, like some other states, we use cultural carrying capacity for the species, and that is the number of animals of any population tolerated by the humans. So obviously, that varies across the state depending on our densities and the land use. And we also take forest health into account, obviously, since deer are do some damage. So, the magic question, and this is a question I get in every township I speak at: how many deer should we have? And everyone is always so disappointed when I tell them There is no magic number. How many deer you should have is up to you. That's your decision.
0.
Yeah, it's how many you can tolerate, you know, and base that on number of deer vehicle collisions, base it on property damage, base it on incidence of tick-borne disease, all those things. So that's for each individual township, like I said. Every municipality has its own comfort zone and its own level, and that's why we're only here to tell you the facts and to offer our assistance, not to tell you what to do. So, again, this is your decision. And many townships use deer vehicle collisions as a metric because that's easy. It's data that's readily available through your local police department because they record those. So you can graph that out and you can see if there's trends increasing, decreasing, stable. You can plot them out on Google Earth to see where your problem areas are in the town, and maybe you want to concentrate your efforts on management in those areas. So that's a good metric to use, deer vehicle collisions. So I mentioned briefly about hunting and what we do here. We had one of the most progressive deer management programs in the country. Even though we're a small state, New Jersey is broken down into 60 deer management zones, and each of those zones is managed as a separate herd with its own regulations. All those 60 zones are broken down into regulation sets, just to make things a little easier. So in our most restrictive regulation set, we have 104 days of consecutive hunting. Here in Bergen County, 5.5 months of hunting. We open up second week in September and close third week of February. And you can take an unlimited number of antlerless deer, unlimited. So we are providing the tools. If we were trying to keep the population artificially high, we're really not doing a good job if we have an unlimited antlerless harvest. And you go for the antlerless harvest because you're trying to take the females out, the breeders out. Deer are a polygamous species, so if you take out one buck, there'll be another buck right behind him to breed that doe. So you need to take out the breeders, and that's the females. And we are not going to questions now, but Cindy will be speaking to you now.
Thank you, Carol, for that, all that information on deer ecology, biology, and management. I'd also like to thank Dr. Lisa Wasatsky and Jim Fedorko for putting together this opportunity to share with you facts about deer management. So we're going to talk about overcoming some of the perceptions of, the challenges of perception about deer hunting. Everyone in this room has something in common. We're all the descendants of ancestors who have hunted. We're not here to talk about philosophies of hunting. Is that something from up here?
We're going to start taking some questions for the first presentation. If you have a question, can you just raise your hand?
I know you briefly went over this about trapping and moving. Are you saying that there's no place, that there's a place to move the excess deer to? That went over very quickly.
Sorry. Yeah, there is no place to move excess deer to.
I have just a couple of questions. You had zeroed in on some interaction that you may have had regarding specifically Flat Rock Brook. So my first question is, you had mentioned that having a deer hunt in Flat Rock Brook was, I guess, discussed, and then it was decided not to have it. Do you know who made that decision?
Half of Flat Rock Brook is owned by the city of Englewood. So in order to affect a hunt that would work, you can't have a hunt on half the property because the deer would run onto the other half. We tried to get the city of Englewood to agree to that. And 4 years ago, that did not happen, which resulted in the fencing of the property.
Was Flat Rock Brook, the other portion, willing to have a deer hunt?
Yes,
So it was the municipality of Englewood that would not have a deer hunt.
I believe so.
I would ask that any of our council members or politicians in the room perhaps explain that to the residents why that would be the case. I would have thought that it would have actually been the opposite, that the environmentalists would have objected to the deer hunt rather than the municipality. You had posted a slide, the second speaker just now, that a common complaint is what prompts people to go to their municipal leaders to solve the problem. So I just would like it noted that it appears here from what you just told me that it was the municipal leaders who actually prevented the problem from being solved.
I believe that to be the case, and this is 4 years ago, so I'm not sure it's the same people on the council now as it was 4 years ago. But
My last question revolves around, and I live within several blocks of Flat Rock Brook, just from a rational and sensible or common sense point of view, virtually every person that I have talked to, and there's been quite a few about this issue, when you say that they built a fence around the deer's habitat, they actually think I'm making a joke when I say that it was to keep the deer out. I would like to know, because you mentioned that there's tracking of vehicle accidents, I would again encourage some kind of an environmental impact statement since this fence has been put up to determine whether there's been an increase in vehicle accidents and other adverse impacts that the fencing of the deer and causing them to be essentially living that close to the population in such a fairly urbanized situation. I really think it needs to be studied, and perhaps there should be maybe an actual consideration of having that fence removed. Thank you very much.
Hi, yeah, I was wondering how, given the size of most of the parks that I know around Englewood and Teaneck, what are the risks of having a hunt? And I'm assuming it would be what, either guns or bows, either rifles or bow. But I mean, it sounds like that's the only thing that really is going to work. I haven't heard anything so far that says there's any other way to manage the deer population except to, to thin it out and shoot them, or shoot them with a gun. But given that the parks are so small, how could you have people shooting rifles? And I'm just unclear how they can control the bullets, knowing what goes on in the Catskills with, hunters shooting cows and dogs. And I'm wondering, who these hunters are, who we could call in to shoot the deer. I get out of town for a couple of days and sort of wish them luck, outside of a couple of busted windows maybe, but.
So, good question. In a highly urbanized situation like this, we would never advocate for the use of firearms, obviously. Not by anyone, not even your local police department. Sorry. But bows are a very effective weapon. Cindy's going to show you some facts about bow hunting. And it would be a controlled hunt. You're not going to, the great fear is that the great unwashed will descend upon your town, and there'll be a hunter behind every tree, and people will be diving out of the way of arrows and bullets, and that's not real life. So a lot of townships employ deer management. You don't hear about it. In fact, it's really only, Bergen County is pretty much the only county in the state other than Hudson County who does not have any deer population problems. When they have problems, I'm retiring, that's it. So really, Bergen County is the only one. Deer management goes on every other year in every other township. You would have a specialized controlled hunt. You might not even use sport hunting. You might, if you wanted to spend the money, hire a culling agent. We worked with one township on the shore of Lake Capacon in Sussex County. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that area. Old bungalows, right? Old summer bungalows, one on top of the other along the lake shore. You know, you get lucky if you can get a car between these houses. You figure, how are you gonna manage deer there? There was one resident who lived on an arm that jutted out into the lake, who went around, knocked on 10 of her neighbors' doors, got an agreement that they were going to put a bow hunter on their properties for that winter, and he took out like 17 deer in the first year. So it is possible. It's going to be small scale. It's not going to, you know, safety is the priority always, always, always. So Cindy's going to talk about hunting one of these days. And so I hope I answered your question. Yes.
Yeah, I'm from Teaneck, and we do have a large park. It's 50 acres. That's Argonne Park. And my understanding is that the deer in the community kind of move around. But if you decided that you were going to reduce the population, it would not be difficult to take an area like that that's got lots and lots of deer in it, and although it sounds a little hokey, hire some archers that know how to do that kind of thing and reduce the population, which would reduce the population in the whole town because the deer keep moving around. They don't just stay in one place. So I'm wondering if that kind of thing has happened in other towns where they've taken an area where the deer seem to concentrate and reduce the population at that spot, which is safer than trying to shoot between the houses.
Absolutely, yeah. You can bait them into areas, and that will help somewhat, but sometimes you have to get around houses, depending on where the deer are. Like you said, there are no trees, they don't stay in one spot, so like you have to plot out those deer vehicle collisions on a map to see where your problem areas are, and that would help you decide where you need to do your management. But yes, if you have any large pieces of open space, that's the ideal place to get it done. We're ready.
Apologies for the technical difficulty. You get to see my notes, which is not the idea here, but that's just what we're going to have to work with. So, there we go. Okay. So, I already mentioned that everyone in this room is a descendant of ancestors that have hunted, and that we are not here to discuss philosophy, but instead facts and deer management information. Residents come to township officials and complain about damage to their vegetation, to their gardens, deer vehicle collisions, and they seek relief through county or municipal officials. As Carol mentioned, and as many of you know, how many people have hit a deer with had a deer vehicle collision or know someone who has? Just about, more than half the people in the room, not surprising. This is from Allendale, further north in Bergen County, and the blue represents each deer vehicle collision in their community. The red is where they had incidents of deer complaints. The odds of hitting a deer in New Jersey are 1 in 229, and the average vehicle damage repair cost, as you can see, $4,200. It's pretty expensive. Many communities have concerns about Lyme disease, increased incidence of tick-borne illnesses. Does anyone know or has anyone had Lyme disease? Quite a few people. There's some counties, some townships in Morris County that are trying to take action regarding that because of the concern with a high incidence of Lyme disease. Deer serve as a blood meal for the tick to molt to the next life stage, and they also bring ticks close to humans, which is another problem with high deer populations. This is from the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and you can see New Jersey is quite in the hot spot in the northeast part of the country. From Hunterdon County, in a relatively rural area, these arborvitae were munched when they were younger. They won't grow back. It's not the latest design landscape design fad. But in this is a common complaint that there's damage that can't be sustained by a high deer population. This is closer to home in Bergen County in Allendale. Allendale was not being a very good neighbor. The celery farm is next to this residential area, or maybe the other way around, and that area has a high deer population, no understory of young vegetation that would replace the canopy as it dies off. It's too many deer, and the Allendale's not really being a good neighbor until they have deer management on this property, and it's something that they are contemplating. It's not just a problem in New Jersey. Nationwide, a cover of Time magazine shows that it's widespread, and a large majority of people support regulated hunting. Municipalities and nationwide that have polled their residents have found that, in surveys, have found that approximately 74% of those surveyed would support regulated hunting as a management technique, both in New Jersey communities and nationwide. So who are regulated hunters? They're conservationists, and people wonder, well, how can a hunter be a conservationist? Hunters will contribute funding. There's an 11% excise tax on sporting arms and ammunition that are collected by the federal government. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service administers a federal aid that's returned to state fish and wildlife agencies for research and management, wildlife conservation projects, and this is one way that hunters are conservationists. $14 billion since 1937 when the program began. Annually, it's about $371 million generated for wildlife conservation paid for by hunters. However, non-hunters benefit also. Habitat conservation is part of that. This is the oldest program, the nation's oldest program that is benefits everyone, and it's a wildlife restoration program that's a user pay, user benefit, but as I said, it benefits everyone. Hunter education programs are also funded by this federal aid, this 11% excise tax that's returned to the states. If you don't know a hunter or don't know anything about the sport, you might be unaware that in most states there's a mandatory hunter education program. That's also true for New Jersey. New Jersey's program is one of the best in the country. We have a home study course where you can use a workbook and a video, go through the program at home, sign up online on our website for a field course, demonstrations, and written exam. It seems like there's some kind of difficulty with their system. It's hanging up when I advance it, so I'm not sure what to do about that. I'll go back and see if I can move forward. Now it's doing it on its own. Okay. So we have trained instructors that teach roughly from March through November. Each student at a hunter education course must demonstrate safe, responsible handling of the sporting arm for the course they're taking. If it's a firearm course or an archery course, there's 100% live firing in New Jersey, which means everyone must demonstrate safe handling of that sporting arm. And this would be both for firearm courses and for archery courses. With archery, there's a proficiency required because the archer is part of the shooting system. This gives hunters a foundation for how to be safe, responsible sportsmen and sportswomen. The topics that are included in the course are safety, laws and regulations, ethics, responsibility, a little bit of survival and first aid. So I ask you, now the problem with this is I have to ask the question, I can't advance it because you'll see the answer. So putting down the clicker, in New Jersey, there's approximately, well, if you take the number of hunters times the number of days they could hunt in the field, there's like 3 or so million recreation days afield. In densely populated New Jersey, with all those days, all those opportunity days for hunting, recreation days afield, how many hunting accidents do you think we have in New Jersey? Just take a guess, shout it out. If you know the answer, please don't, but just guess.
4.
One said 4. Who else? What else?
47.
42. Any others? So let's see what this says. 5. It's pretty impressive safety record. So what the most unsafe thing a hunter does is drive to their place of hunting. The same thing all of us did coming here tonight, unless you live in the hospital. Nationwide, other statistics show not only that hunting is one of the safest activities in North America or in America. If you compare cheerleading with 27 times more likely to be injured, or basketball 58 times, and football 135 times more likely to be injured than someone if they were hunting. Taking a quick look, I don't expect you to be able to see the numbers, but just you can see the highlights that for Bergen County, annually, about 6,200 auto accidents with injuries. Statewide, 60,000 auto accidents with injuries. Compare that to 5 hunting accidents in New Jersey. Hunters are responsible to know the regulations. We put on the front of the stage copies of our Fish and Wildlife Digest, the hunting issue. You can pick them up. You can then become familiar with what other municipalities might choose to do or sportsmen do if they are utilizing regulated hunting, whether it's for recreation or for deer management, which would be the case in municipalities that are densely populated. Responsible hunters want violators removed from the population of other hunters. They're not considered hunters, they're violators. That's why the laws and regulations are fairly strict. In 1990, the Sportsman Responsibility Bill was passed and enacted. This increased the fines and made them, the penalties stiff enough that would be a deterrent. The greatest thing a hunter would be concerned about for violations is losing their hunting privileges. There's significant incentive for them to comply with the laws. And there's a parallel between driving and hunting. They're both regulated by the state. They both have many regulations. They're both licensed. They're both a privilege. And so there's a similarity between those. Certain violations, if they were serious, if a hunter had 2 violations of, I think trespass may be one of them, they may lose their hunting privileges for 5 years. Responsible hunters want violators removed from the population and prosecuted. New Jersey conservation police officers are patrolling 365 days a year, 7 days a week, and also educating the public on fish and wildlife laws. In more densely populated areas, this is from Highland Park, New Jersey, adjacent to a small property of around 20 acres they call the Meadows. This damage is certainly not something people want to sustain. Landscaping is expensive, and those trees will not grow back. In densely populated areas, bow hunting might be a reasonable option to consider. It could be a good match for several reasons. It's quiet, it's discreet, it's effective, and it's a short-range sporting arm. Whether it's using any type of archery equipment is considered short range. The safety zone is a distance where a hunter could not have a nocked arrow or a loaded firearm. I didn't touch anything. Someone gonna get up and dance? The safety zone is a distance between that a hunter cannot have a nocked arrow or a loaded firearm from a building. In New Jersey, the bow hunter safety zone is 150 feet, except it's 450 feet from a school playground. That same 450 feet that it would be for a firearm hunter. So you can see the safety zone, the inner light-colored circle is the bow hunter safety zone, and the 450 feet larger one is the distance for a firearm or from a school playground where you could not have a loaded sporting arm or a nocked arrow. This is a buffer. It is not ballistically significant. You could hunt closer with written permission in possession, and the reason why this might be an advantage was understood by the New Jersey legislature. A number of years ago, they studied the issue, and it was determined that to assist municipalities in suburban areas where deer populations were not able to be controlled by regulated hunting, that smaller safety zone with a hunter shooting down toward the ground from a tree stand was a reasonable safety consideration, especially since a hunter could hunt with their back toward buildings and move away, hunt away, so it can allow hunters to access those deer that are otherwise unavailable and still be safe. You can see here that a safety zone does not have anything to do with property lines. If Farmer Jones on the right there had a farm that was adjacent to a house where a property where their hunting was taking place, that safety zone would, that's the other way around, but the safety zone would wrap over into Farmer Jones's property. He could not hunt that because the safety zone is mandated by law and it moves with development. It's an imaginary circle. I think we covered that already, that the bow hunter safety zone, being closer, 150 feet, can enhance the opportunity to reduce deer populations, have access to those deer, and access is key. Mentioned already that hunters generally hunt from an elevated position, shooting down toward the ground, and it has several advantages. It enhances safety, it minimizes human scent. Deer actually have quite a few advantages over humans. Deer have a great sense of smell, keen hearing, reasonable eyesight, different than humans, of course, but minimizing the human scent down at the deer's level, at the level of the deer, is a technique utilized by hunters. You may also be familiar with them using cover scents. And if you're hunting from an elevated position, you're above the deer's usual line of sight, but I can tell you they do look up into tree stands. And all these features of bow hunting can increase effectiveness and can be an advantage. So just to recoup, archery equipment is safe, effective, and efficient for harvesting deer, and it is a short-range sporting arm. And that short range that hunters usually keep it to is 20 to 30 yards. Private land hunting, this was, this was also Allendale, where we mentioned that if they're not going to remove deer from that overpopulated celery farm, that they're not being very good neighbors. This is a browse line. The distance the deer can comfortably reach, they can stand up on their hind legs and reach further, but that's a common browse line, somewhere around 4.5 or so feet. Landowner cooperation is necessary. They have that in Saddle River, where quite a few properties were giving permission for hunters from a structured program to have access to private land to help remove the overpopulation in Saddle River. It takes place, hunting takes place safely, statewide already. And And again, that 150-foot safety zone can be improve access in suburban settings. Just to share one situation in Hopatcong Borough, Sussex County, they have some very closely placed properties, houses, and they had such a problem, we worked with them, they had such a deer problem where they wouldn't normally have hunter access. One neighbor walked around to about 10 or 12 property owners and asked if they would give permission for a licensed hunter to help remove deer. I think there were 10 properties, all but one landowner said yes. They were very successful in this Elbow Point neighborhood of Hopatcong Borough. So it can be done where a municipality and their residents find that that is a reasonable option to pursue. Often people are asking questions about, well, what about if I allow a hunter onto my land, what about liability? The Landowner Liability Act, which is highlighted in the digest if you'd like to review more of it, has a clause in it, part of it I've shown here, where the landowner owes no duty to keep the premises safe for entry and does not assume responsibility nor incur liability for injury to person or property. So you can review that if you want to pick up a copy of the digest later, but this can give landowners some comfort for allowing regulated hunting on their property to help deal with the deer population problem. Hunters can also purchase liability insurance expressly for covering their hunting activities in New Jersey or nationwide through several avenues, and one of them is the New Jersey State Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs. That information is also in the Hunting Digest if you'd like to review it later. Trespass is a question that comes up. There are steep penalties for trespass, and for the purpose of hunting, our conservation officers advise us that for officially being able to issue a summons for trespass, a landowner has to either give verbal notice, written notice, or have signs posted to keep hunters out. Those serious penalties are a deterrent, and if a hunter has a repeat violation for such an offense, they lose their hunting privileges, all of their sporting privileges, for 5 years. More on responsible hunter conduct. In some county parks, it's multi-use. There are a wide variety of activities that might be going on in county park areas, and if it's managed properly, there is no conflict with regulated hunting and other activities that are going on in county parks. Certainly if there's an event like a ball field, that's not an area where hunters would be interested or where deer would be found, most likely, anyway. Hunting takes place on state wildlife management areas, county parks, and other public properties already. And recreational hunting can be both a management tool and a recreation, and we need to respect other users, and respect their activities. Carol mentioned earlier the Hunters Helping the Hungry program. Both some municipalities and some county park systems that allow hunting have started to set aside designated funds, a modest amount of designated funds, to allow hunters who have maybe taken more deer than they want. They filled their freezer, they filled their relatives' freezers, their neighbors don't need any more venison, yet a municipality may still need to have deer removed from the population. Well, what's the incentive for the hunter? If a municipality or a county entity can help support paying for the butchering at inspected, regulated hunters that are butchers that are part of this program, that can go a long way to having this be a management hunt. Beyond just the recreation level, these situations, it's a management hunt. And the Hunters Helping the Hungry program have donated, 27,000, I think it's 31,000 pounds of venison and more than 126,000 meals for those who need it. New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife can have programs like this for township municipal officials and other township employees to educate the residents, lawmakers, and the municipal officials about deer management and how we can assist in developing a program. Some municipalities may already have an ordinance in place, part of their municipal code, that could prohibit the discharge of firearms or bows, if they call them weapons, and they may need to be adjusted in the event that a municipality chooses to have a controlled hunt and regulated hunting for reducing deer. Englewood does not have, Englewood's restriction is only on firearms, and it would not restrict bow hunters. Just like we did in Plainsboro this year, we can assist a municipality or a county entity in developing a deer management program and hunt program rules. They don't need to be elaborate, but they need to be structured so that everyone is following those regulations and that there's some organization to the program. And again, hunter access is the key. There was a municipality in Monmouth County, Shrewsbury Borough, 2.2 square miles. They had an overpopulation of deer, and in 2006 they were going to eliminate hunting by preventing the discharge of firearms. Our agency went and met with them during a public hearing, and they didn't want to pursue the information or take us up on our offer, so they did enact an ordinance that would prevent hunting. 6 years later, they come back to us and say, we have a deer overpopulation problem, won't you help us? They were going to consider opening municipal land, but they had a better solution for that particular community, and that was their police department and other municipal people encouraged residents to allow hunting on private land, and in the first year, they harvested 70 deer out of 2.2 square miles. That makes a difference. Access is the key, of course. So our goal in working with municipalities is to offer guidance in developing those programs, and we've traveled throughout the state to do that. A few key reminders, as you can see. Remember, it's important to remember, hunting is a safe sport. Hunter access is the key if a municipality chooses that route, and if it's appropriate for the land area and the level of development. And regulated hunting as a management tool is effective, efficient, and free. And if there are any questions, perhaps, should I just take that?
There's a question.
We have Matt Trout first, back there.
Oh, one more thing I want to share. Before people leave, we have some fairly classy looking pens. If you want to remember the agency that manages your fish and wildlife since 1892, come on up and pick up a pen when we're done with this. We have enough for everybody.
I see we have the disco going. So I kind of like a follow-up question on the gentleman who was speaking earlier about Flat Rock Brook and the fencing. I live in a kind of like on the other end of town from where Flat Rock Brook is, and over the past couple of years I've noticed more and more deer in my area. I mean, deer, turkey, more rabbits, groundhogs, everything is in my backyard. I live adjacent to a park. So I guess since the deer can't get into Flat Rock Brook and they're migrating all over the town, how appropriate would hunting be? And then I also noted that recently there was a story about Staten Island where they were catching the bucks and neutering them. Especially in Englewood, because the deer that are constant, well, they're not around so much now because maybe they're out trying to do whatever they're doing. But the ones that I see all the time, they don't seem to be afraid of us, and it's, we're pretty suburban. We're still suburban, but in different parts of the city, the homes are closer. Wouldn't it be a great idea in this case to potentially catch these deer and neuter them rather than considering hunting as an option?
Let's see, first part of your question, I'm not sure what the distance was from your property to Flat Rock Brook. If it's within a mile, you may have been seeing those deer might have been on your property anyway, maybe you just weren't seeing them as much. But deer in an unhunted population have the potential to double their population every year. So the deer you're seeing in your yard aren't necessarily the ones that came off of Flat Rock Brook. I'm not saying they're not, but you are going to have more deer every year. That's just the way nature works. As far as neutering goes, if you remember what I said, the Staten Island thing, one of those deer actually swam to New Jersey, one of the bucks, and he was like, I'm out of here, man. Of course, he didn't wind up in good shape when he got here, but you can't treat the males because there would be another male right behind them to take his place. So chemical or surgical sterilization is good in an island population where there's no immigration, or in a zoo situation, but not in the wild.
We have the ability to eliminate all the deer in your town. Now that I got your attention.
Tell me your secret.
I watch the deer in a particular neighborhood, and it's the same deer. They come around all the time. There's a three-legged deer that lives in my daughter's neighborhood, and we watched her grow up. She's had fawns. I mean, and it's kind of a localized area that they stay in. So if you wanted to remove all the deer from a particular community, you allow drone assessment and locate where they are, and then send the bowmen in to take them down. We have the capacity in wintertime to do a deer survey with drones.
You can, and there's other ways of doing surveys as well, but like I said, we already have that data through deer vehicle collisions, so we know where most of them are, and you can bait them onto a property, especially in the winter time when natural food sources are scarce.
Well, would the ordinances allow me, I have 1.5 acres of property. I have 6 deer who come to visit every Thursday. If I were to contract a culling agent, I'm assuming there are some available I can pay to do it, can that person come and kill those 6 deer? I mean, is that permitted in a neighborhood?
I don't think you'd need to pay somebody to do it. If you know a hunter and put them in your backyard.
Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah, you are. As long as, a bow hunter, because there is no discharge ordinance in Inglewood.
How do I find these people?
And they can't be within 150 feet of your neighbors, any structure, garage, stable, shed, anything like that.
I think I can get my particular neighbors that are on the periphery, I think I can get them to sign on. Because they're as upset about the entire thing as I am.
Like that neighbor in Papaca.
Yes.
Yes.
Because half of the problems I have found that everybody, a good part of the population thinks, sweet deer. No, you can't want to kill a deer. Yeah, I do want to kill it. I don't personally want to kill it, but I want it gone. And this is the only solution.
Okay. I'm a resident of Inglewood, and my backyard is our Oregon Park vicinity. Literally, my backyard, if I walk over the property line, I'm in the wetlands. I have experienced that exponentiation of deer population over the last 8 to 10 years. I've counted 40 or 50 moving through. They actually walk up and down the streets now. They have destroyed all that provided as the pictures show. They do get on their hind legs in the wintertime and pull anything they can down. I have no hostas. I've spent numerous amounts of money with the chemicals, for the odor and everything. And after a rainstorm, it washes it away. We need to literally come up with a management program to reduce the population. I'm the first line. If I can hire somebody to come in my backyard and go 150 yards into the woods, and Argonne Park is a 57-acre property surrounded by residents' homes. We're all being devastated by it. I would like to see them reduced. I've spoken with Carol before, and she knows I've been an advocate of this.
Mr. Williams?
Yes, I am.
Nice to finally meet you. We've been pen pals for years.
Thank you all.
We'd be happy to work with your township if that's the route that they choose to take.
I've been a resident of Englewood, my wife and I have for 40 years, and we have a 2-acre piece of property. And every year it's getting worse. And it's really been aggravated with the fencing in of Flat Rock Brook. And the other day we had 2 buck on our property. And tonight we're driving out of the driveway to come here, and I looked out and there was an 8-point buck, and my wife said, "Oh, that's the one who's usually here." And they have a little path they come down. In the introduction it said there were representatives of the Englewood government here tonight, and I'd like to hear from them, because it's obvious the problem is getting worse, and I just feel there's inaction on it. And it's obvious listening to the 2 of you tonight, and I thank you for giving such good talks, that we have ways of controlling it. And I had bad poison ivy this summer, and the dermatologist said, "Well, do you know what poison ivy looks like?" And I said, "Of course I know what poison ivy looks." She said, "Do you have deer?" And I said, "Yes, we have deer." And she said that the deer are spreading poison ivy. They don't get it, but apparently they leave it on our plants and everything. But I'd like to hear if there are any representatives of the Englewood government here this evening. And I'd like to hear what they say is going on. Are there any?
Yeah, we have 3 council members here. I don't...
Yeah.
My comment would be that the appropriate place for us to conduct this per the way the city government is organized is at a council meeting. And since there are 3 of us here, hearing what everyone has to say, I'm sure we can make it an agenda item. But it would just be a one-off to say my personal opinion. I'm mostly here to understand people's concerns and then translate those concerns into an agenda item for city business.
But why hasn't anything been done? Because we've been writing to council people now for 2 years about it.
I've never received an email from them, but I'm making up. You're Ward 1, correct? No, I'm Ward 1. You're Ward 1, you're the new one? We're both new. Michael Cohen is here, he's been here for... Okay. I wrote a letter, the first one, I would never receive that last year. After that person had written me, had written everybody in our ward a holiday card telling us my dates. And you got my dates louder than you don't know what my dates is. Well, I wrote to you, I never got a response. It was exactly about this new population problem.
I think Councilman Michael Cohen wants to say a few words from the 2nd ward.
Hello, everyone, and a few things. One of the things that we try to do was, by bringing it up at the council meetings, resulted in folks like Lisa and others coming together with Flat Rock and the Department of Health to put together a committee to start to investigate what we can do regionally, which led to the meeting tonight. So there are things that are being done, and tonight, and really want to thank Lisa and everybody else on that team and trying to establish this as trying to first put together some sort of regional response, because one of the things that we've been told over and over and over again is that Englewood itself can't solve the problem. No town can, because it's a regional problem. And if you solve it in Englewood, you'll have it from Teaneck or from Leonia or from everywhere else. So we've got to work together regionally to try to figure this out. And to the best of my knowledge, this is the first meeting that I've seen which truly has been a regional meeting in doing that. And like I said, I give a lot of credit to Lisa for bringing everybody together and the rest of the team of that nature.
We look at this as being the first step, is by having this educational symposium. And then we'll see how we can move forward.
But the consensus has to say that we're willing to kill the deer. This is the problem.
Do you want to,
They have to be.
you know, one issue that I'd like for Carol to address would be when you start to take a step, some counties have done it as a county, or do we go ahead like Saddle River and do it as a municipality? If you could just address that.
Happy to, and thank you for asking that. It's an important question. I hear, not from biologists, but mostly from administrators, that it's only going to work on a regional level. Well, ideally, that would be the best, but that's not a reason to start in a municipality. There are probably hundreds of municipalities in the state that are holding management hunts, regardless of what their neighbors are doing to give their residents relief. Would it be better if your neighbors did it? Yeah, and if you start, maybe they'll jump on the bandwagon too. It's not a reason not to start.
Just one other thing I wanted to say quickly. About a year and a half ago or so, we try. One of the things that we saw is obviously one of the concerns, besides in traffic and other places, there's also a very significant concern about folks with young kids having deer in their backyards and having their kids there and what that effect can be. I know as somebody who has young kids, I don't really care whether somebody says a deer is safe or not safe. If my 9-year-old daughter's sitting in the backyard and there's a fully mature deer there, I'm taking her inside the house. And one of the kind of things that we were trying to say is, and we learned tonight, which is kind of confirmed tonight, was the fact that deer, we were told, can jump 6 feet from a standing position. And right now, the Englewood fence ordinance only allows you to put up 6-foot fences. One of the things that I had asked, that we tried to pass a year and a half ago, and I'll say this is before my colleagues in the council were on the council. So this is last year, and I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe we can revisit this with us having a new council now. Was that in certain instances, whether if you were bordering on, let's say, Flat Rock, or bordering on different places where not just in the middle of town where it's aesthetically an issue, but to be able to have allowances in certain specific instances to be able to put up 8-foot fences, not in the front, but only in your back and side yards, so it would not affect the streetscape, but it would allow for, if you have, let's say, like you said, if somebody said before, if they're backing onto a park and nobody's going to see that except for that resident, but it can help protect that person's family, that in those specific instances allow greater height to protect against the deer in backyards, that situation. So maybe we can revisit that.
You can't wall off the entire property.
Okay, we have to move on to the next question.
All right,
my question is to the audience. Did everyone come here expecting to hear about how to manage deer, which to me seems like just a euphemism for killing deer? I did not. I came here thinking I was going to hear about how to maybe take care of them or somehow manage it without killing them. I grew up in an area, I grew up in New York City where there's no deer. That's not a pleasant place to be. I work in Hudson County where they said in the States there are no deer. And from my perspective, I'd much rather be in Bergen County where there are deer. I moved to this area because of deer. I've seen wolves, I've seen coyotes, I've seen hawks, I've seen wild turkey, I've seen vultures, I've seen, all these things I see when I take my dogs out for a walk. These are some of the things I enjoy because I'm here in Bergen County. If I didn't want to see a deer, I would pack my family, look for a place in Hudson County because that's where I work actually. It would be closer and more convenient for me, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for nature, and I thought that's what we had here in New Jersey, in Bergen County. So I was hoping if there's other ways to manage deer, maybe by planting plants that do not attract the deer, because we actually, sometimes we invite things over and then we complain when they're there. Okay, but one moment, ma'am. Let me, you had a chance. You had a chance. Okay, so there's different ways to manage animals. For example, if you leave your trash can with the lid off and you have raccoons in your yard, then you complain that you have raccoons. The raccoons didn't come to your yard, you invited the raccoons to your yard. If you have deer because you planted hofstras or other types of plants that they want to eat, you're actually, it's like you're opening up a supermarket and you're complaining that somebody's coming to your supermarket. So I think that may be part of the answer, but it shouldn't be the focus of this thing.
So your question to Carol is what kind of management, other management to consider?
Other than eradicating the wildlife?
Thank you.
No one ever said we're trying to eradicate the wildlife. We're trying to bring it back into balance, as I stated. If we wanted to kill every single deer in Englewood, there'd be no way humanly possible to do that. You're still going to see your wildlife. You're just going to see them at more natural numbers that don't cause deer-human conflict levels that you have now.
We have the next question right back here, the gentleman with the hat on.
To the gentleman with the compassion for the deer, I'm sure everyone echoes your feelings in here, at least somehow. And it would be a great world if we could live side by side. It would be amazing. And yes, many of us moved out here because it is like the country, and it's terrific. But I have to tell you, in all 4 wards, it's become a situation where the deer aren't scared by headlights anymore. They're not scared by shouting. They're not scared by whistles. They're not scared by people anymore. They just sit there and they're almost mocking us. We have many numbers of children playing in our backyards, playing in McKay Park on Sunday mornings and Saturday mornings, soccer, and deer, big deer. I have pictures, but I'll spare you, are coming over to the kids playing soccer. The kids are scared. There are people who have busted windows in their patios from the deer. It just seems like it's not a fair fight anymore. And I appreciate the doctor who spoke tonight about balance. It's very important that we get back to balance. If I may ask you, it sounded, and by the way, many of us have tried rosemary and red beeping lights from Amazon, and the sprays from Home Depot, and the guy with the van. They're overpowering us. It's not a fair fight. Young lady, you had mentioned that, doctor, you had mentioned that, well, I mean, everyone will make up their own assumptions, but what I got out of this is, sadly, the only way to control the population at all is, sadly, through organized managed hunts, which is too bad, but again, so we're just trying to get the balance, so at least it's a fair fight. What I didn't hear from all the pesticides, the bows, the shotguns, what I didn't hear is kind of like what they do in the city with rats. Can't, like, perhaps, because we don't want gunfire, and bows are, I suppose, a little dangerous. Is there any kind of poison that we put out in Flat Rock, like bait and poison? Because you're saying trapping and getting rid of doesn't work, and the sterilization is too expensive and unmanageable in labor. Is there any, or did I miss it about the poison? And lastly, I would call on the elected officials that are present tonight to step this up to be a priority. I know it's been going around the city council for a couple of years, but I don't think it was really very organized, and I don't think it was a priority. I would call upon the city council members that are here, and thank you for attending, to really step this up as a priority. It would be a shame to all of a sudden make this a priority after, I'll give you a God forbid, after something bad happened. It would be bad if it was after an accident or something happened to a child, that all of a sudden everyone said, oh, this is a tragedy, we have to do something. It would be nice if for once we could be proactive about it.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the promotion. I'm not a doctor, but thank you. And as far as poisoning goes, no, on many levels, because it's not a humane death, and you will have non-target organisms eating it. You'll kill every animal, and possibly some children who even stumble upon it. So, no, can't do poison. It's for the same reason why you can't do oral contraceptives in deer, because it's not a good delivery method.
Right. We're going to just take 4 more questions. Steve, did you want to?
We have this lady right here.
Okay. And
We've been in Englewood for 45 years. We've seen possums. The first one I ever saw was in Englewood, and other animals. But the deer in the last 5 years, we've had twins and a doe in our backyard. The feces wasn't mentioned. That's a problem for kids, for grandkids. And then there's ticks. My husband had 2 tick bites, and thank goodness no Lyme. We had titers, but you know there are problems. I don't like poison after Monsanto and Roundup. I don't want any poisons anywhere. But my husband told me a few years ago in Fairfield there were 2 camouflage guys with bows walking around a commercial property where he was working. I said, well, who are you guys? He said, well, we're doing a controlled hunt. Do you want some more venison? I said, no, but they do that in Fairfield, obviously. So that's one town I can say, I don't know how they contracted it or how they did it, but that was being done there. So there are ways to do it maybe that are least hurtful and less bio, you know, we don't want poison. I don't think that would go very well, but certainly a bow controlled and maybe timed so that people are aware, and permission or not on your property. How it would go, I don't know the technicals, but I think we need it because I've seen that population, the feces, and we have no more hostas. We tried to plant other things and they started liking yews all of a sudden. They spread their tastes over some plants I didn't know they'd eat. Azaleas so far are safe until they get really hungry perhaps. But I think that we need to do something at this point because overpopulation has made its, you know, reared its ugly head. And that's my comment.
Okay, and you're right, you mentioned some things that would take place in a controlled hunt. It would be a very controlled situation if that's the path the city chose to pursue, but there would be specific people chosen. You would have to allow, you know, give permission to allow hunters on your property. The city could not mandate that you open your property, so there would be a lot of controls on it, and it would be successful.
Go ahead, Steve.
Hi, my name is Steve Wiesner. I'm the director of Flat Rock Brook Nature Center. Heard it a few times tonight. So I wanted to, I guess, not so much a question for Carol, but just to kind of what Flat Rock has done over the years to get to this point. We had a committee that worked on it from Flat Rock's perspective that was studying the issue for 3 years. We did, as Carol mentioned, initiate the process for the last time this was discussed about 4 or 5 years ago at the City Council, and Carol's correct that there was not a consensus at that time to go ahead with a management plan that included hunting, and being that half of our property is on city land with the setbacks and the way that hunting was just not going to be possible without the city support in that regard. But that being said, so the next phase was Flat Rock does have a mission. We're a nonprofit organization. Every nonprofit has a mission. And our mission is to preserve the land and educate about the environment. And it was decided, you know, if we wanted to preserve our forests, we couldn't just do nothing, which was an option that is not possible in the situation because we wouldn't have a forest, we wouldn't be able to educate, we wouldn't have wildlife. So, you know, we decided to go ahead with the deer fence option, but we did do that on only 90 acres of the 150-acre park. So there's still 60 acres that the deer are free to roam. There was sort of a misconception too that we had, you know, we did 3 deer drives over the last 2 years and we pushed out a total of 13 deer. So they are an edge species. They're not living in Flat Rock all the time. They're going through just like all the other wildlife. They're in your backyards because you're providing the yummy deli food that they like. So Flat Rock is a place that they do go from time to time, but it's not a place that they're at all the time. They're transitioning through. That being said, we had wildlife ecologists come through and they basically looked at our property, they walked it, and they said, yeah, hunting probably won't work here without other municipalities. And we're bordering 2 municipalities, Englewood Cliffs and Fort Lee, and we're not too far from Leonia. And wildlife ecologist said, if you wanted to be successful, you know, if you did it on your little park, the way that the deer move around, it would be very difficult, and we wouldn't really be doing our mission if we were basically killing 10 deer a year, which, you know, would maybe be the amount that would be killed. They would be replaced, and they'd still be destroying our park, and not really us not adhering to our mission. That being said, we should probably think about if there is, we're not opposed to deer management solutions at Flat Rock. We're actually the ones that brought this up the first time. So if we're part of the commission, as Councilman Cohen said, we're going to be part of the discussion. We want to be involved, but it's really we have to have some support from municipalities. We have our county official here, Tracy Zer. You know, Bergen County Parks, thousands and thousands of acres that deer are inhabiting right now. Over Peck Park, I'm going to imagine there's quite a few over there. So, you know, we're part of we would like to be part of the discussion, and we do appreciate our neighbors that are unhappy about the fence. I just want you to understand you know, we want to have a forest for you all to enjoy, you know, and if we did nothing, we would not have a beautiful nature park that people have grown to love right here in our community. So we're kind of frustrated too that it's difficult. They're destroying our property just like they're destroying yours. So we had to make a tough decision, and that was a decision we came up with at that point, but we're happy to be part of any future decision making and be part of all the commissions and task force on the issue. And thank you.
Just from a humane perspective, is death by arrow slower or more painful than death by gun?
I've never experienced death by either, but
I don't have statistics on that. It's probably something that can be looked up, but I do know that it's reported that the way an arrow would cause hemorrhaging, that it is a quick slice and that it is like bleeding out. And that is a humane way, I believe, that they slaughter some domestic animals, you know, sheep, things such as that.
exsanguination.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Mike Passo. I'm been an Englewood resident now for 64 years. Since I was 6 years old, I grew up long before there was a Flat Rock Brook, and have been a trustee at Flat Rock Brook at various times since 1974, 6 months after we started the Englewood Nature Association. I'm a career science educator, and I'm very pleased to hear a lot of the information that was presented tonight, and I'm very pleased that there's a large audience that is now much more aware. And the main thing I want to say is that at this point, whatever action is taken should be based upon facts, not gut feelings, not beliefs, and not the sort of thing which right now is controlling some of our other environmental decisions on a national basis. So this is a regional problem, as has been said. We cannot solve it simply because we have decisions made here in Englewood. We need to work on this on a wider level. But again, I urge that we do this based upon facts and not waste time on beliefs. Thank you.
Jim, we have time for one more question.
I'm not sure if I heard you correctly, but I thought that I heard you say that that it was legal for us to have bow and arrow shooters in Englewood. Is that right?
Yes.
So how would we find these people and hire them?
We have several organizations. There's
Sorry.
We have an organization called the New Jersey Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs, who have county chapters. I could put you in touch with them. There's a club called Bergen Bowman. We can put you in touch with them. And even though we're breaking up soon, if you have any further questions, I'll hang around and try to answer as many as I can.
I want to thank everyone for coming, and hopefully this is the beginning of a conversation.